Hi, welcome back. The story of the fork is not one of battles, revolutions, or royal intrigue. It is a tale far more subtle, more domestic, and yet quietly transformative in the way it has shaped our habits, our meals, and even our etiquette. It is the story of a humble tool, a common object we barely think about today, used by billions every single day, across every culture and continent. The fork, for slender tines, a handle, simple, unassuming, yet behind its simplicity lies a journey that spans more than 1,000 years. The earliest origins of the fork trace back to the ancient world. Long before it graced dinner tables, it began its existence as a utilitarian tool. In the ancient Middle East, small two-pronged tools were used not for eating, but for cooking, mainly to carve and serve meat. The Greeks, too, used prong-like utensils in the kitchen, though they were not yet intended for individual dining. Forks were functional, not fashionable. They appeared in tombs and temples, more as culinary tools than as markers of culture or custom. In the Roman Empire, some evidence suggests that wealthier Romans may have had access to two-pronged utensils, often made from bronze or silver. These were used occasionally for serving or perhaps to pick up sticky delicacies. But again, they were not yet dining instruments in the way we think of them now. For centuries, eating was done with the hands, with a knife or with a spoon. Hands were considered the main instruments of eating, and for a long time, the idea of using anything else, particularly a tool, with sharp points, seemed not only foreign, but unnecessary, even vulgar. The real shift began in the Byzantine Empire, where the fork made one of its first tentative appearances on the dinner table. It was in the 11th century that a Byzantine princess named Maria Argyropoulina married into the Venetian nobility. When she arrived in Venice, she brought with her a set of small, delicate golden forks. At meals, she used them with elegance to handle fruit and sweets, avoiding contact with her fingers. But rather than inspire admiration, her refined habits scandalized the Venetians. At that time, such behavior was considered excessive, even sinful. The church condemned the fork as an object of vanity. After all, they argued, God had given people natural forks, fingers, and it was prideful to reject them in favor of golden tools. When Maria died young from a disease, some even claimed it was divine punishment for her luxurious eating habits. So the fork, for a time, remained an object of suspicion and ridicule. It was seen as foreign, unchristian, and unnecessary. Still, the fork did not disappear. It quietly endured, lingering in the East, especially in the Byzantine and Islamic worlds, where etiquette and cleanliness were highly valued. Slowly, it began to make inroads back into Europe, first in Italy. By the 14th century, forks began appearing more often in Italian households, particularly among the aristocracy. They were still two-pronged, often made of silver, and used mostly for sticky or messy foods that one might prefer not to touch. Over the next 2 centuries, Italian culture continued to evolve around the fork, not rapidly but steadily. The real turning point came during the Renaissance. Italian nobles and merchants traveled widely, and Italian influence spread through Europe, through art, architecture, fashion, and cuisine. Among the items traveling with the Italian elite were their peculiar dining habits. The fork was one of them, and one woman played a key role in its wider acceptance, Catherine de' Medici. When Catherine married the future King Henry II of France in the 16th century, she brought with her a full entourage, including her cooks, her stylists, her perfumers, and her forks. Her Florentine background made her well-versed in the refined etiquette of Italian dining. She used forks at the French court, and although at first it seemed odd to many, her influence was undeniable. Slowly, the fork began to take root in France. Still, it faced resistance. Many people continued to see it as pretentious, especially outside the nobility. Eating with the fingers was still the norm, even among the elite in many parts of Europe. It wasn't until the 17th century that the fork began to be used more widely, and not until the 18th century that it became a common table utensil across most of Europe. The design of the fork also evolved. Early forks often had just two tines, good for spearing food, but not for holding or scooping it. Over time, craftsmen began experimenting with three, and then four tines, which offered greater functionality. The four-tined fork, the design we know today, became standard by the 19th century. Its rounded curve allowed it to scoop and hold food more easily, complementing the knife and spoon in the now standard trio of Western utensils. In England, the adoption of the fork was especially slow. The famous writer Thomas Coriat is often credited with introducing it in the early 1600s after visiting Italy. He described the fork in his travel writings and even brought one back with him. He used it in public and was mocked relentlessly for it. He was called furcifer, a play on the Latin word for fork, and his effete manner of eating was considered laughable. But Coriat persisted, and in time others followed his lead. By the late 17th century, forks had gained acceptance among the English upper classes. As the Industrial Revolution progressed, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the fork underwent yet another transformation, this time not in design, but in accessibility. With advances in metalwork, especially in Sheffield, England, mass production made forks affordable to the growing middle class. Suddenly, a tool once reserved for nobility could be found in middle-class homes. Dining etiquette evolved rapidly, and new customs around table manners emerged. By the Victorian era, forks had become not just tools, but symbols of civility. Different forks were introduced for different courses: salad forks, fish forks, dessert forks, each with its own proper use. In the United States, forks were also slow to be adopted. Colonial Americans were mostly eating with knives, spoons, and their hands well into the 18th century. Forks were viewed as extravagant or unnecessary. But like in Europe, increasing trade and cultural exchange slowly changed things. By the early 19th century, forks became standard in American households, thanks in part to European influence and the rise of American manufacturing. Today, we rarely think about the fork. We use it every day, often without noticing it at all. It has become so natural to us, so mundane, that we forget it was once a controversial, exotic, and even scandalous object. Yet this quiet utensil has had a profound impact on the way we eat, the way we sit, the way we dine. The fork helped to civilize the table. It encouraged the use of plates instead of communal bowls. It changed the design of foods, favoring softer textures that could be pierced or lifted by tines. It led to new forms of etiquette, new rituals, and even new industries. Cutlery became an art form. Entire businesses were built around the production of fine dining sets, and the fork was central to it all. But perhaps what's most fascinating is not how far the fork has come, but how quietly it has done so. It is a symbol of calm evolution, a reminder that history isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes history is quiet. It unfolds slowly, gently, like the curve of a tine or the polished surface of a dinner setting. So the next time you sit down to a meal, take a moment to notice the fork. Hold it in your hand. Think of the centuries of change it represents. From the kitchens of ancient Persia to the opulent courts of Florence and Versailles, from scandal in Venice to mass production in Sheffield, from gold to stainless steel, it has touched the lives of kings, poets, revolutionaries, merchants, and millions of ordinary people. It is quite simply a masterpiece of subtle history, and its story is not over. As cultures evolve and global cuisine continues to spread and intermingle, the fork continues to adapt, joining chopsticks in Asia, coexisting with hands in Africa and the Middle East, blending old traditions with modern innovations. It remains quietly in the background, a daily companion, a small silver thread running through the great tapestry of human civilization. Next up, in the quiet corners of our everyday lives, there are countless objects so common, so small and unassuming that we seldom stop to think about them. They sit in drawers, on old letters and scrapbooks, or tucked away in forgotten albums. Yet each one holds a unique story, a delicate window into the past. Among these humble artifacts is the postage stamp, a small square or rectangle of paper, gummed on one side and carefully printed on the other. Its value might be no more than a few cents, but its history spans continents, empires, revolutions, and dreams of connection. The postage stamp, in all its humble glory, is a surprisingly recent invention in the long arc of human communication. But the need it answered, the need to deliver messages across distance, has been part of civilization for thousands of years. In the ancient world, long before stamps were even imagined, messages were carried by runners, riders, and royal messengers. Ancient Egypt had a form of state communication as early as 2400 BCE. In Persia, Cyrus the Great established a postal system using mounted couriers. In ancient China, under the Han Dynasty, government dispatches traveled between provinces via postal roads. These early systems were created not for the general public, but for monarchs and officials. They were tools of empire, not of the people. As time moved forward and civilizations grew more complex, so did their need for structured communication. In medieval Europe, royal courts and wealthy monasteries used messengers and horse relays. The costs were high, the delays frequent, and for the average citizen, mailing a letter was either impossible or a luxury. By the 17th and 18th centuries, various kingdoms and city-states began to formalize public postal services, but the model remained inconsistent. Payment for delivery was typically made not by the sender but by the recipient. When a letter arrived, the receiver had to pay to read it. If they could not afford to or did not wish to, the letter was refused. It was a system flawed by inefficiency and inequality. Many letters went undelivered. The burden on recipients was unpredictable. There was no uniformity in pricing, and no real way to prepay postage. The spark of change came not through dramatic upheaval, but through the quiet determination of one man. His name was Sir Rowland Hill, an English school teacher, inventor, and social reformer. Hill was a man of method, logic, and civic conscience. In the 1830s, he began to study the British postal system, deeply troubled by its complexity and inaccessibility. He noticed that high prices discouraged communication, especially among the poor. He believed strongly that the cost of sending a letter should be based not on the distance it traveled, but on its weight. And more importantly, he believed the sender, not the recipient, should bear the cost of postage. To make this new system work, Hill envisioned a simple innovation, a small, prepaid adhesive label that could be affixed to an envelope or letter as proof of payment. This tiny token would streamline the process, eliminate confusion, and make correspondence accessible to everyone. It was an elegant solution to a deeply entrenched problem. After much lobbying, Hill's proposal was accepted by the British government, and in 1840, the world's first official postage stamp was issued. It was called the penny black. The penny black was small, just under an inch square. It featured a profile portrait of Queen Victoria, engraved in black on a white background. There was no country name printed on it. Britain, being the first, saw no need to declare its origin. The cost, 1 penny. It covered delivery anywhere in the United Kingdom, regardless of distance. The idea was revolutionary. Overnight, communication became democratized. Anyone who could afford a penny could now send a letter. The penny black was soon followed by the 2 penny blue, and the momentum began to spread beyond Britain's shores. Other nations began to watch with interest. In 1843, the Swiss canton of Zurich issued its own stamps, and Brazil followed that same year with its bullseye issue, making it the second country, and the first in the Americas, to adopt adhesive postage stamps. In the United States, the first official stamps were released in 1847. They featured portraits of Benjamin Franklin and George Washington, founding figures chosen for their symbolism and familiarity. Postal reform had arrived. The design of stamps quickly became an art in itself. These small printed canvases were used not only for utility, but also for messaging. They celebrated national leaders, landmark events, innovations, flora, fauna, and cultural achievements. They were miniature ambassadors, traveling across borders with images of pride, history, and identity. For many, stamps became more than just proof of postage. They became collectible treasures. Philately, the study and collection of stamps, was born. As the 19th century wore on, more and more countries adopted postal stamps. France issued its first stamps in 1849. The German states began issuing theirs in the 1850s. Japan introduced its first in 1871. The process of sending mail became increasingly standardized and reliable. As global trade, immigration, and education expanded, so did the volume of mail. Postal stamps followed every migration route, every empire, every rail line, every ship. They documented wars and peace, revolutions and commemorations. In 1874, the Universal Postal Union was established in Switzerland, creating a global framework for international mail exchange. This organization helped unify the world's postal systems and establish protocols for cross-border deliveries. It was a quiet triumph of global cooperation, and postage stamps were its foundation. Uniform weight standards, consistent formats, and recognizable markings made it all possible. Through stamps, nations talked to one another. People connected, families reunited, lovers rode across oceans. With the dawn of the 20th century, postal services grew increasingly sophisticated. Machines began to automate sorting. Post offices expanded into rural areas. Airmail took to the skies. Stamps became more colorful, more varied. Commemorative issues honored Olympic Games, space flights, national parks, and famous artists. The humble stamp evolved into a cultural artifact, part artwork, part document, part mirror. Yet the true worth of stamps lies not in their market value, but in their quiet persistence. For generations, they have marked the rhythm of life. Birth announcements, holiday cards, war letters, postcards from faraway places, government notices, love letters wrapped in ribbon and stored in drawers, their corners curled and ink faded, each with a stamp, a tiny witness, a final touch. Today, in the age of digital communication, email, and instant messaging, the use of stamps has declined. Fewer people write letters, fewer stamps are licked and affixed, and yet they remain. Postal services continue to print new designs. Collectors still find joy in discovering rare issues. Artists and designers breathe new life into the format. And even in a world moving faster than ever, the postage stamp invites us to slow down, to reflect. It reminds us of a time when sending a message was an act of patience and intention, when every letter had weight, when communication wasn't disposable, a time when a single square inch of paper connected two hearts across oceans. The postage stamp in its silence tells us a very human story, of invention born from kindness, of reform inspired by fairness, of art in the service of connection. From the dusty roads of ancient Persia to the crisp presses of Victorian England, from handwritten love notes to space mail carried aboard rockets, the journey of the stamp is not one of noise or spectacle. It is a history told softly, a legacy carried in pockets and purses, on envelopes and memories, a reminder that sometimes the smallest things carry the longest messages. Next up, in the quiet moments of reflection. When the mind drifts to simpler times, few objects evoke the calm curiosity of school days like the humble eraser, small, pliable, and often overlooked. The eraser rests at the end of a pencil or in the corner of a desk drawer. It's rarely the star of any story. Yet its very existence speaks of second chances, of trying, failing, and trying again. Its invention was not born out of grand ambition, but from a soft whisper of necessity. And like all things crafted to solve a common problem, it has nestled itself deep into the rhythm of daily life. Long before the rubber eraser came into being, humans were already making marks and seeking ways to remove them. The story of the eraser is intimately linked to the story of writing itself. In ancient times, long before paper and pencils, people wrote with styluses on wax tablets. To correct an error, they simply smoothed the wax surface, erasing the text with a sweep of the hand or a small scraper. On papyrus or parchment, mistakes were scratched off with knives or scraped with stones. Later, ink corrections were made by blotting or scraping and rewriting. And then came graphite. In the mid-16th century, a large deposit of pure graphite was discovered in Borrowdale, England. This naturally occurring substance left rich, dark marks and was ideal for writing. The people of the time didn't yet call it graphite. They believed it was a form of lead, and the term pencil lead would persist for centuries to come. To correct a pencil mark, however, presented a unique challenge. Ink could be blotted, wax could be smoothed, but graphite resisted these older methods. In those early years, before any dedicated tool existed for removing graphite marks, people used small pieces of bread. Fresh bread, particularly the soft, white inside called the crumb, was a surprisingly effective eraser. The gentle friction of the bread's texture would lift graphite from paper without tearing it. Writers and artists across Europe relied on this simple, biodegradable tool to make corrections. But bread, as one might imagine, had its shortcomings. It dried out. It crumbled. It attracted insects. It was far from ideal. The world would wait more than 2 centuries before something better came along. And the story of its discovery, like many turning points in history, was accidental. It was the year 1770 when English natural philosopher and polymath Joseph Priestley made a curious observation. While studying the properties of newly imported natural rubber from South America, he noted that this material, called caoutchouc by indigenous peoples, had a remarkable ability to erase pencil marks. The term rubber itself was coined from this very quality. To rub out a mark was now no longer a phrase. It became a product. And it was Edward Nairn, a British engineer and instrument maker, who would be the first to commercialize this discovery. Legend has it that Nairn accidentally picked up a piece of rubber instead of the usual bread while trying to erase a pencil mark. The result amazed him. He quickly realized the commercial potential and began selling rubber cubes for the purpose of erasing writing. They were expensive and somewhat crude. Natural rubber tended to degrade quickly and had an unpleasant smell. But they marked the birth of the eraser as a manufactured good. Despite its effectiveness, early rubber erasers were fragile. Natural rubber, as it was harvested and cured in the 18th century, was sensitive to temperature changes. It hardened in the cold, became sticky in the heat, and decayed over time. These qualities limited its utility. It wasn't until the 19th century that rubber's true potential would be unlocked. The transformation came through the work of Charles Goodyear, an American inventor obsessed with the properties of rubber. In 1839, Goodyear accidentally discovered the process of vulcanization. By heating natural rubber with sulfur, he created a material that retained its elasticity and strength across a range of temperatures. This rubber was durable, weather-resistant, and long-lasting. Vulcanization revolutionized not only the eraser, but the rubber industry as a whole, from tires to waterproof boots, from machine parts to electrical insulation. With vulcanized rubber, erasers became reliable. They could be mass-produced, standardized in shape, and sold affordably. Soon, pencils began to feature small erasers attached at the top. The union of pencil and eraser was not inevitable, but it was practical and soon ubiquitous. Over time, manufacturers introduced new formulations and materials to improve the eraser's function. Additives like pumice were used to make them more abrasive, enhancing their ability to lift graphite. Others introduced synthetic rubbers and plastics for better control. Erasers were molded into different shapes, some wide and flat, others small and precise, each serving a particular purpose. Artists favored kneaded erasers, pliable like clay, which could be shaped and dabbed to lift graphite gently from delicate sketches. Students used colorful rectangular blocks. Architects used specialized erasers that left clean, sharp lines. What began as a chunk of bread had evolved into a precise instrument of revision. a soft partner to the sharp point of a pencil. And yet, for all its technological progress, the eraser retained something profoundly symbolic. It embodied forgiveness in tangible form. The very act of erasing is an acknowledgement that perfection is not expected, that mistakes are part of the process, that change is possible. Throughout the 20th century, erasers took on many forms. Some came in whimsical shapes, animals, fruit, or cartoon characters designed to appeal to children. Others remained minimalistic, clean lines and neutral tones, their appearance as calming as their function. The classic pink eraser, made of synthetic rubber and pumice, became a schoolroom staple. The white vinyl eraser offered a softer, crumblier alternative. Mechanical pencil users adopted tiny cap erasers and twist-up barrels, allowing for fine erasing with minimal waste. Despite the rise of digital technology, the eraser has endured. Even in an era of backspace keys and touchscreens, the tactile satisfaction of a pencil stroke and the gentle removal of a graphite mark remain unmatched. The eraser is not just a tool, it is a quiet companion to thought, a reassurance that no mark need be permanent. In journals, in sketchbooks, in margins filled with musings and mistakes, the eraser is there not to judge but to allow. Its silence is its strength. It asks nothing. It promises nothing. But when needed, it is there. And in its small, unassuming way, it teaches us something profound. That revision is part of creation. That to erase is not to destroy, but to refine. The invention of the rubber eraser is not a tale of triumph or conquest. It is a story of quiet evolution, of human needs met with simple solutions, of hands that write and then pause, of minds that reconsider, adjust, and proceed. And as long as we write, draw, calculate, imagine, there will be errors. There will be moments when we pause, reflect, and reach for that soft tool that makes things right again. The eraser, in its stillness, waits. And with each gentle stroke, it reminds us, every mark can be changed. Every mistake can become part of the journey. Every page, even when smudged, holds the promise of something better. And so, the story of the eraser continues. Not loudly, but gently. Not with noise, but with understanding. A companion not just to the pencil, but to the process of being human. Next up, in the long arc of human history, few inventions have been as quietly revolutionary, as deeply transformational, and yet as understated in their global influence as the metric system. It is a system of simplicity, of elegance, and of order. A framework born not from conflict, but from a universal desire for clarity. To understand the adoption of the metric system is to explore a story of human cooperation, of scientific progress, and of the endless pursuit to make the world a little more understandable, one unit at a time. Long before the metric system came into being, the world was a patchwork of measurement. Units differed from country to country, region to region, and often even from one town to the next. A foot might be longer in one market than another. A gallon might hold more or less depending on local tradition. These inconsistencies, while born of culture and custom, created confusion in trade, science, construction, and even daily life. What was needed was not just another unit, but a universal language of measurement. The seeds of this new system were planted during a period of extraordinary change. In the late 18th century, France found itself in the throes of revolution, not only politically, but intellectually. The Enlightenment had spread ideas of rational thought, logic, and universal truths. It was in this climate that the call for a standardized system of measurement gained real momentum. A system not based on king's feet or ancient approximations, but on constants of nature, on reason itself. In 1790, the French National Assembly commissioned the French Academy of Sciences to create a new, unified measurement system. The task fell to some of the greatest scientific minds of the time, including Jean-Baptiste Delambre and Pierre Méchain. Their goal was ambitious: to define a unit of length based on something that did not vary from one region to another, something that belonged to the planet itself. They settled on the meridian, the distance from the equator to the North Pole, measured along a specific line of longitude. After years of painstaking measurement, traveling from Dunkirk to Barcelona, they established that 1/10,000th of the distance from the equator to the North Pole would be the base unit. This became the meter. From this single natural unit, the rest of the system would flow based on powers of 10. A liter would be the volume of a cube measuring 10 centimeters on each side. A kilogram would be the mass of 1 liter of water. Everything in the metric system would be logically connected, mathematically coherent, and elegantly scalable. In 1795, France formally adopted this new metric system, introducing it with the hope that it would replace the patchwork of medieval measurements. Yet the transition was not immediate. Habits, especially those passed through generations, are not so easily undone. Farmers, merchants, and everyday citizens resisted the unfamiliar units. Some preferred the old ways. Others simply did not understand the new ones. The government introduced educational campaigns, laws, and even penalties to encourage adoption. But the journey was slow and uneven. Still, the foundation had been laid. As the 19th century unfolded, the practicality of the metric system began to shine through. Its simplicity appealed to scientists and engineers, who found in it a system that supported precise calculations and international collaboration. 1 meter was always 1 meter. 1 kilogram was always 1 kilogram. There was no ambiguity. In 1875, a major turning point arrived with the signing of the Meter Convention, an international treaty that brought together 17 nations to formally adopt the metric system as the standard for international commerce and science. From this agreement came the creation of the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, located in Sèvres, France. There, the official prototypes of the meter and kilogram were stored, physical embodiments of humanity's shared standard. Throughout the 20th century, the metric system continued to spread. Countries recognized the economic and scientific advantages of aligning with a universal measurement language. Nations across Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America adopted the system for official use. In schools, students learned to convert grams to kilograms, centimeters to meters, and milliliters to liters. Scientists exchanged data across borders with newfound ease. Despite its rational design and growing adoption, the metric system's path was not without resistance. Some countries, notably the United States, retained their customary systems. The reasons varied from economic inertia and cultural familiarity to political will and public sentiment. Nonetheless, even in non-metric countries, the influence of the metric system was unmistakable. Science, medicine, military operations, and international trade increasingly relied on metric standards in laboratories and factories. In space missions and pharmaceutical production, the metric system reigned quietly and effectively. By the dawn of the 21st century, the metric system had become the world's most widely used system of measurement. It stood not just as a technical achievement, but as a symbol of global unity. From a bottle of water in Nairobi, to a highway sign in Paris, to a weather forecast in Tokyo, millimeters, liters, and degrees Celsius conveyed meaning that transcended borders and languages. In recent years, the metric system has continued to evolve. The old prototypes stored in vaults have been replaced by definitions based on fundamental constants of physics. The meter is now defined by the distance light travels in a vacuum in 1,299,792,458 of a second. The kilogram is defined not by a physical object, but by the Planck constant, a fixed number in quantum physics. These changes may seem subtle, but they represent a profound shift from objects made by humans to values drawn from nature itself. The metric system, once born of revolutionary vision, now rests on the very fabric of the universe. What makes the metric system so enduring is not just its practicality, but its philosophy. It embodies an ideal of harmony, of a world made simpler through shared understanding. It offers a way of seeing the world through patterns and proportion, where one unit flows gracefully into the next. And though it touches every aspect of modern life, measuring ingredients in a recipe, calculating distances between cities, calibrating medical dosages, it does so quietly, without fanfare, without intrusion. It simply supports the rhythm of daily life, helping the world move, build, heal, and learn with consistency and clarity. In a way, the adoption of the metric system is not a single event, but an ongoing story, a gentle unfolding of order amid the complexity of human life. It is a quiet triumph of cooperation over chaos, and in its stillness, it reminds us of something profound, that even amidst our differences, we can agree on certain truths, that through shared standards we build shared futures. As we continue to grow, explore, and discover, the metric system will be there, offering structure, offering connection, and whispering a quiet promise that in a world of constant change, some things can remain universally understood. And so, the journey of the metric system continues, not loudly, but steadily. 1 meter at a time, 1 gram at a time, one shared world, measured by the same quiet rhythm. Next up, it is often the smallest inventions that shape our daily lives the most. We notice them rarely, but we rely on them constantly. Devices so seamlessly integrated into our routines that we forget there was a time when they didn't exist. Among these quiet revolutions is something tucked into our jackets, stitched into our backpacks, and fastened to our boots. It opens and closes, binds and separates, and does so with a satisfying, familiar sound. It is the zipper. The story of the zipper begins in an era of great invention. During the late 19th century, when humanity was racing forward with machines, engines, and electrification. Amidst this industrial crescendo, a man named Elias Howe, already known for inventing the sewing machine, filed a patent in 1851 for what he called an automatic, continuous clothing closure. This early design, though novel, was never commercialized. Howe, distracted perhaps by the success of his sewing machine, did not pursue development. Still, the idea was planted. A new way to fasten clothing had been imagined. It would take several more decades and a fresh mind to breathe life into the concept. In 1891, Whitcomb Judson, a mechanical engineer from Chicago, patented a device he called the clasp blocker. It was designed as a hook-and-eye shoe fastener, a tool to reduce the time and trouble of fastening high-button boots. Judson's invention had promise, and he even showcased it at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Yet, like many first-generation technologies, it was flawed. The clasp blocker often jammed or failed, and it proved difficult to manufacture. Consumers were intrigued but not convinced. Nevertheless, Judson's efforts were not in vain. He had sparked a movement toward innovation in fasteners, and his designs laid the groundwork for future development. In 1894, Judson and a business partner founded the Universal Fastener Company, which later became the Automatic Hook and Eye Company, and eventually the Hookless Fastener Company. In these organizations, engineers continued refining Judson's idea, seeking a design that was simple, durable, and functional. Then, in the early 20th century, came a critical figure in the zipper's journey, Gideon Sundback, a Swedish-American electrical engineer working for the Hookless Fastener Company. Sundback brought a fresh perspective and meticulous craftsmanship to the challenge. He didn't just modify Judson's design, he reimagined it. In 1913, Sundback developed the Hookless Fastener No. 1, which was soon followed by a more advanced version. Known as the separable fastener, his design used interlocking teeth instead of hooks and eyes, which allowed the fastener to glide smoothly without snagging. Each side of the zipper had a row of small metal scoops, and a slider pulled the rows together or apart with ease. This was the birth of the modern zipper. In 1917, Sundback was granted a patent for his separable fastener. It was an engineering triumph, stronger, more reliable, and suitable for mass production. Though the mechanism was in place, the name zipper had not yet been coined. That would come a few years later, thanks to a company known for making rubber boots. In the 1920s, the B.F. Goodrich Company adopted Sundback's fastener for a new line of rubber galoshes. When demonstrating the product, a salesman pulled up the fastener and made the sound zip. The name stuck. The company marketed the boots as having the zipper, and soon the term came to define the fastener itself. It was catchy, modern, and easy to remember. The zipper had found not only its form, but also its identity. Initially, zippers were used mainly for boots and tobacco pouches. It wasn't until the 1930s that they made their way into clothing. French designers began using zippers in men's trousers, and American children's clothing manufacturers found them especially helpful for simplifying dressing routines. In 1937, Esquire magazine declared the zipper the newest tailoring idea for men, noting its superiority to buttons in both function and style. From that point on, the zipper's popularity surged. It began to appear in skirts, dresses, jackets, luggage, uniforms, and eventually jeans. It was embraced not just for its practicality, but for its symbolism. The zipper represented speed, convenience, and modernity. It was an emblem of forward-thinking design, mechanical, reliable, and progressive. World War II further cemented the zipper's place in society. Military gear required efficient fastening methods, And zippers were used in everything from flight suits to sleeping bags. Their production was scaled up, and the technology was refined even further. The zipper was no longer a novelty. It had become a necessity. After the war, zippers became ubiquitous. They appeared in homes, in workplaces, and schools. Designers began experimenting with materials, introducing plastic zippers, colorful zippers, and even invisible zippers. The basic mechanism remained the same, but its applications multiplied endlessly. Zippers could be waterproofed for outdoor gear. They could be miniature for delicate garments. They could be oversized for dramatic flair. By the second half of the 20th century, zippers were being produced in the billions. Factories all over the world competed to manufacture them faster, cheaper, and more efficiently. A quiet war of design was fought not with noise, but with precision and efficiency. Companies like YKK in Japan became global leaders, setting new standards for zipper production. Even today, YKK zippers are renowned for their reliability and quality, and they are used in products ranging from fashion to aerospace. The zipper's journey, however, is not just about engineering. It is a story about solving a simple human need, how to hold things together. It is about reducing friction, quite literally, in everyday life. With a gentle pull, the zipper brings together two edges, effortlessly, securely, and with a pleasing tactile finality. What is remarkable about the zipper is how little it demands in return. It does its job quietly, reliably, and for years. We notice it only when it breaks, and even then, we are reminded of its near-perfect design. It is a humble tool, but one that shapes our routines in countless invisible ways. In reflecting on the zipper's evolution, from Howe's early prototype, to Judson's clasp locker, to Sunback's breakthrough design, we see the very nature of progress. It is not always fast. It is not always celebrated. But it builds incrementally from one idea to the next, from failure to improvement, from spark to realization. The zipper is a symbol of perseverance, refinement, and the beauty of simplicity. It asks for nothing, yet delivers so much. It has no screen, no battery, no signal. And yet, it connects. Silently, perfectly, with a sound as soft as a whisper. Zip. In a world driven by grand gestures and noisy innovations, the zipper reminds us of the quiet power of the everyday, of how the smallest mechanisms can hold the largest systems together, of how something so simple can still be extraordinary. And so, the next time you reach for your coat, close your backpack, or fasten your jeans, pause for a moment. Listen to that sound, feel that glide, and remember the long journey of ingenuity, patience, and purpose that brought the zipper into your hands. A journey measured not in miles, but in tiny interlocking teeth. A journey that zipped the past to the present, one pull at a time.